Okay, so here we are, Mr. Rick Kozin. We are in Des Moines, Iowa, and I know that you work for Polk County and you are the health department director?
That's correct. I'm the director of the health department.
Okay, and I'm really excited, number one, to be in Des Moines because my family is from here. My husband's entire family is here. And we're sitting in this lovely, cozy backyard at my sister-in-law's house. And it's a nice sunny day, and we're just having a chat about what you are so passionate about. So I know that your passion lies helping people who maybe aren't treated fairly or people who don't have a voice. Can you tell us more about what exactly that means for you?
Yeah, I mean, through a lot of my work, and actually what got me into my work, I mean, every day there are people who the things that matter to them aren't taken as seriously as they believe they ought to, because not our decisions are not made in ways as a society, and our policy decisions aren't made in a way that really encourages everyday people who don't have particular access, don't have political power, to have their say taken seriously. So most of what I have done through my life is through the discipline of community organizing, of connecting people who feel powerless with other people who feel powerless. And when you connect enough people who are powerless with enough people who are powerless, they're not powerless anymore. They begin to be in a position where they can start articulating what matters to them, and they can start be taken seriously.
Because there's power in numbers.
Because absolutely, there's power in numbers.
So, first of all, how did this begin for you?
I guess there are two phases that when I was in college. I mean, I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in an affluent, professional family, and as the oldest son, there was a clear expectation that I would go to college. Nobody ever asked me why I would go to college, and through sort of wandering around, I ended up with history professors and the political science professors, and I learned that my upbringing wasn't the norm. My upbringing was extraordinarily fortunate and extraordinarily exclusive, and that it was no more than the luck of the draw that so many of the things I had counted as normal benefits were mine, and that in fact, that when decisions are made, they're not necessarily made in which everybody's interests are taken account. And that struck me as unfair, and it struck me as something I wanted to do something about. The challenges, changing the world, there's no job description listed in the classifieds for changing the world. And when I was in graduate school and frustrated with the direction of my studies, I had a colleague who said to me, and I remember this distinctly, because she said, "You ought to become a community organizer." And I said, "Well, what's a community organizer? I'd never heard of that." And she said, "Well, those are people who work with people in their neighborhoods, in their communities, help them identify the things that matter to them, connect them with other people who share the same concerns, and collectively, they figure out what they can do about that." And I remember saying to her, "Well, that's pretty cool. Do people get paid to do that?" And 35 years ago, the answer was, well, sort of. But that sounded like sort of, at that point in my life, sort of was good enough. So I left graduate school in Chicago and became a community organizer.
Well, and they say that if you love something enough, you'll do it for free.
Yeah, I don't know if the people who turn on your phone and turn on your utilities go along with that to some point. So at some point you have to make some part of being able to pay the bill. So I think when I was in college, I sort of made the decision of what I wanted to do with my life. It just took a while to figure out how I could actually do that.
And speaking with you today, my goal is to inspire my audience just to get involved in something, whether it's a career or something on the side that they feel this passionate about, that they feel they're making a difference in the world.
Well, I think, in some respects, I was very fortunate because, I had the luxury, or if you will, to sort of separate out two questions that we blur together in our society, and I think in ways that make it hard for people to do what you describe. We tend to blur what you want to do with your life with how you're going to earn a living. And those are two very, very different questions. And if so part of what we have to do is encourage people to sort of separate what do you want to do with your life from the question of how are you going to pay your bills. Years ago, I heard a folk singer from back east named Charlie King, and Charlie used to sing this song at retreats I used to go to that he always defined it as his anti-burnout song, but I think it really is a song that speaks to the question you identified. And the verse of it was, my life is more than my work is more than my job. We have a tendency to collapse those into one, right? So the first question we always ask each other is, what do you do? And we define ourselves by our job, not what do you want to do with your life? What's your work about? And what's the particular job? And my work of trying to engage people so they have more control over their life has spanned 35 years, 11 different organizations, 5 different states. My work has always remained the same. Who pays me varies. The specific tasks in my job vary, but my work has always stayed the same because that's the question I think we need to answer first.
We had a conversation about that this morning here at Tammy's house, and we were talking about, because I believe, just like you said, you've done this in many different positions, because what happens when your role is over, right? Your person is still the same, but you feel like something may be lost if you don't have that title. But the reality is your purpose here is the feeling you get, not a role you play. And that's exactly what you're talking about, because you play that role, but you get that you're serving your purpose in all these different roles that you've played. Can you give everybody a picture of what do you mean when you say that you're helping powerless people? What does that look like?
Okay, for example, when I was in Hartford, Connecticut, one of the places I worked as an organizer, one of the things we would hear often from people in the neighborhood is they were tired of renting. They wanted to be able to own their own homes, but they were met with resistance when they would go to local banks. In fact, banks in which they deposited their own money, that the banks would say, well, we don't provide loans in this neighborhood, a term that probably still referred to as redlining. Right? What banks used to do is literally draw a red line around inner city neighborhoods, and if your home was in that address, they didn't make loans. So we got enough people together, and at a point in time when a particular bank in our neighborhood was trying to buy another bank, and the regulatory process allows for citizen intervention. So we filed a formal protest against the bank merger. And the merger was something that was very important to the bank. So they were willing to meet with people in the neighborhood and negotiate a new lending program that gave a break on interest rates for people who lived in our neighborhood or were willing to buy a home in their neighborhood. And lots of people became homeowners who had never been homeowners before. And what it is, you find people who have, there's something that's missing from their life and making their life better, but they have no sense that they can do anything about it. They feel very much alone in it. And the ironic thing is, their neighbors feel the same way, but for reasons I've never really understood. We have lots of across the fence conversations that are very polite, but they don't really engage people in talking about things that really matter. But if you ask people directly, what are the things that really matter to you, then you find people care about the same thing. You can almost witness in the room a growing sense of indignation at collectively being ignored. But I was taught early on that indignation is not a strategy. Right? How you use the collective power in the room is a strategy to get people who haven't been taking you seriously to take you seriously.
So what kind of hesitations or challenges have you found becoming a community organizer like this? And I'm not sure if it comes from the fact that you come from an affluent background or not, but what do you think your biggest challenges have been?
Biggest challenges? Well, one of the challenges was nobody in my family ever really understood what it is I did. I don't think anyone in my family ever ever took it seriously. I think there was this was another phase. that I was going through, and they didn't, and because honestly, I think they didn't understand it. And I remember one of the most powerful things my dad ever said to me before he passed away was, you know, I still don't really understand what it is you do, but I think I understand why you do it.
Wow.
That still means a great deal for me.
You really can't ask for more than that, I think.
No, and I mean, I think one of the things, I mean, part of, you know, I think doing the work for me, I know it was a challenge, but it was a recognition of myself, of recognizing in many ways where that my energy and what really moves me day in and day out is anger or indignation, that it's very, very angry to watch, you know, how people who should be treated better aren't, and that anger, you know, that anger is a source of energy, and anger, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, we have a tendency to sort of say, well, there are emotional responses and there are rational responses, and you know, you always should tone down the emotional responses and act out of reason. I think that's a distraction. All of what we do is grounded in emotions, and understanding what those emotions are is very, very powerful. It's where people's commitment comes from. Passion is an emotion, right? I mean, you're not having a conversation and asking people, help me really understand your logic. Right? Reason and logic you use as tools for the things that really move you, and what moves people are emotions.
And it sounds like you are full of empathy.
There is part empathy, but it is more anger than it is. I mean, in many respects, I mean, I don't define the work I do as helping people. People can help themselves. I mean, there's, you know, lots of language that my colleagues use about we go out and empower people. I don't have any power to give anybody. All what I can do is connect people with other people and win. I mean, my wife Laura gave me a button years ago that I haven't worn in a while, and it came out of a little campaign and said, I've won, I've lost, winning's better.
What do you think you've learned about yourself through all of this?
That the source of my energy is anger. That it's my challenge to control and focus and direct in a productive way, and not, you know, get the better out of me. And you know, there clearly, I mean, you know, one can't, you know, go do this, you know, the kind of organizing work I've done, which literally means so you go into a neighborhood or a community of strangers, you know, and you know, in some respects you introduce themselves in ways they haven't met each other before, and you know, and go in there with the confidence that even though they haven't connected with each other, you can do that. You can't do that work without having a pretty strong ego. I think strong egos is not the same thing as big egos. But I mean, I like winning. I like the fact that, I mean, there's a part of this that's a reflection of not being taken seriously among family early on. And I've learned that when I am part of groups that have power, then the things that matter to me, they get taken seriously too. And I like that.
Okay.
I like getting taken seriously.
Right, I see that. I definitely feel that passion. So if we're talking about getting taken seriously and something you're passionate about, if people decide to do that, because you know there's all different interests out there, and this is a global show here. I mean, we're talking about all around the world. What can people envision their everyday being like if they take that risk, or if they're that brave to do what you've done? And just to live authentically.
No, it never felt brave. It felt like, I mean, I think, you know, what you have is there's a clarity to life and what it is you're trying to do. I mean, as we talked about earlier, the nature of, I mean, I can describe, sort of the series of organizations I've had, and in retrospect, it's a smooth path. But I mean, there've been organizations that had funding issues. There've been organizations that had changes in leadership that required me to, look for other jobs. I've had conflicts where I've gotten fired. But at the end of the day, at the end of every day, I know who I am and what I'm going to do, and there are multiple ways for me to do what it is I do. And there's an extraordinary amount of security. And in many respects, I mean, you can describe it as brave, but I would argue that once you reach that point where you know what it is you want to do, you lived, this may be somewhat overstating it, but you begin to live somewhat, risk-free. The risks sort of go away because you know what you want, and there are ways to do it. And then the ways may change, and there's a certain amount of uncertainty, but I can tell you, I mean, after doing this for whatever it is, 35 plus years in all these different places, and I don't know what's next. I know something's next, and I don't worry about what's next because there's work to be done that matches what I want to do.
I absolutely understand what you're saying. Being on a 50-state tour myself, doing something I'm passionate about too, I don't feel like it's brave either. It just feels like what I should be doing. I get that. So for people to explore, what do you think the exploration process looks like?
I think part of it is, and this is, I think it's harder. It may be harder to do mid-career than it is when you really have no idea what you're doing. But I do think people need to try to step back from what it is they do and think about what do they want to, why they do what they do, and is that a good enough reason?
So once you do that, what's the first step? How do you execute a plan? How do you take that first step, or what do you think that first step could be?
Well, I think one of the first steps, and it's a step I've used at times, is you go talk to people who are doing similar things and ask them, how did you do this? If I'm interested in doing something like this, who should I talk to? I have done that a number of times at transitions where I've gone to people who seem to be doing what I'm doing in an area, in a geographic area that's new to me, and say, who should I talk to? Where are there things? And that has always led to an open door. I mean, we talked earlier, I mean, Laura and I moved to Nebraska 27 years ago from Connecticut because I was offered a job as an organizer. And prior to that point, every time I had looked for work as an organizer, it meant moving geographically because there weren't that many organizers in that one place. So this is the first time, well, it's the second time, but it was the first time, to look for something else, and we decided we didn't want to move. We wanted to stay in central Nebraska, and there weren't any organizing jobs per se. So I spent some time, whether it was a couple of weeks or, just visiting with people and say, this is what I want to do. What do you know that's around here? Are people
So do people who need assistance in some way or want to make change in their community, do they know that there are people like you out there supporting them? Like how do you get the word out that there is an organization, there is a department, there is a place for people to voice their needs?
Some do, most don't, which is why so much of our time is that you go out and
canvas?
Yeah, and knock on doors. There's a, right, I mean, I'm sure there's a famous, cliche that, so that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, the converse of that is true as well. Powerlessness corrupts and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. I mean, when people have so many things going on in their life, and they don't have any sense that they can do anything about them because they're so overwhelmed with the smallest detail. The idea that there's a place to actually go, it's beyond, in many ways, it's beyond their comprehension. And the example I've often used when we would work with tenants and who lived in a building in which they didn't have a completely responsible landlord, and they say, if every day you walk through the front door, which is open and unlocked, and you can't figure out how you're going to get the landlord to simply lock the front door, then all the other bigger issues in your life around whether the street is safe enough for your child to walk to school, whether or not there are better paying jobs, are about as your ability to impact those and think about making a difference with those. So let me give you an example. At one point, the last place Laura and I lived in Hartford, we lived across the street from drug dealers, not by choice, but certainly after we moved in, it was very clear there were drug dealers operating across the street, and I knew what you do in a situation like that. You go talk to your neighbors. I was an organizer, and I knocked on the door of my neighbors, and everybody I talked to knew the drug dealers were there. Nobody was happy that the drug dealers were there. Everybody was very frustrated. So we convened a meeting in Hiram and Mary Walker's apartment, and and I was probably we were probably the newest people on the block. So we got everybody in the room. Two things were clear. One was everybody knew everybody. Even if everybody didn't literally know everybody, there were no strangers in the room. People had been there, they had visited with each other, and were friendly. And they had never talked about the drug dealers. It impacted people's lives every single day. They visited with each other every day. They never talked about the drug dealers because I think each of them believed there's nothing we can do about this. So it no longer lists, it doesn't exist as a problem that you don't think you can do anything about is not a problem. It's life, and you deal with it, and you just live with it. And that's what had happened. They didn't think about reaching out. It was just part of life.
They didn't even consider that there was a solution.
No.
That's because as a community organizer, you have a perspective that is completely different than the majority of people, because you were thinking about the power of many.
Because I could see what happens, and again,
and they're thinking fear, which is probably the case with most of the people that you help.
Part of it was fear, and part of it was you have no expectations of what the people in authority would do. So, part of the stories we would share is, so there'd be an incident. This was a drive-through drug dealer. So people would drive down the street, they'd sit outside. One of the two brothers would come down and do these transactions, and like lots of drug transactions. Fortunately, they were not violent transactions, but they were often loud, and they were often late at night. So, what any of us would do is you'd call the police and say there's a drug deal taking place across from my street. But because of the neighborhood we lived in, you would call because you felt you had a sense of the call, but nobody called with any expectation that the police would actually come, and they didn't. But each when we got in that living room, each of us thought, that the only one who called on Saturday was me. And I expected to be ignored. But when people recognized that they ignored me, and they ignored you, and they ignored you, and they ignored all of us, that was, in my sense, the opening, for me to say, ignoring me, that's acceptable. Ignoring an entire street of working people, that's not acceptable. You want to do something about this? And they said, yeah, we'll do something about it. And it took a while, and it took some creative stuff, but we got rid of those drug dealers.
Awesome, that's excellent. So what closing advice do you have for anybody who, may want to get out there and do something that's going to make a difference?
There's a quote I came across from Mark Twain recently that I think may speak to this. And I assume I'm taking on face value that it was Mark Twain, but it said, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you realize why. And life is too short to put off not being able to answer that second question and second guessing. It's not.
You know what, Rick? I think so many people are just stuck in their routines that they don't really realize that they are here for a bigger purpose and that their presence in this world is a powerful one. I think that you just inspired them to do that.
I hope so.
How can they either reach out to you, or how can they get involved, or even if they need help, what are your suggestions?
Well, my contact information, my name is Rick Kozin. I'm the director here at the Polk County Health Department in Des Moines, Iowa. My email address is rick.kozin, Kozin, at polkcountyiowa.gov. But while my role currently is at the health department, I have worked with neighborhood-based organizations. I have worked with faith-based organizations. There are organizations in every community that have a role of trying to get residents together. And so much of it is sort of start where you think the answer is, and if it's not, the people you're calling will know who it is. I mean, our networks, unfortunately, are not as big and as extensive as we'd like to be. But once you start the conversation of asking, where is there a place that will help me connect with my neighbors, help me connect with other people who care about these things? Start with your faith leader, start with the school. It may take a couple of things of people saying, well, I don't know, but maybe you should try talking to so-and-so. My colleagues exist in communities all over the country.
I want to thank you so much for hanging out with us today and giving us these great details. And I just want to say to you, I know you need this anger, this fire, this drive to be passionate, but don't let it weigh you down too hard, because you are too pretty for that.
Thank you, Lynette.
It's been great getting to know you.
And I talk to you, 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 and we love, and we hate, and we demonstrate, we try to relate. This is my breakthrough. Whoa. Said now, this is my breakthrough. Whoa. Oh man, this is my breakthrough.